Okay, here's a wild thought for you. What if the very same thing you used to heat up last night's pizza could completely change one of the oldest, grimiest industries on the planet? Yeah, today we're asking a pretty wild question. Can we actually get the metals for our phones, our cars, everything, by microwaving rocks?
I mean, really think about it. The copper for your wiring, the aluminum in your laptop, the nickel that powers your phone's battery, all of that stuff starts out as just rock, ore. And getting it out? Well, that process is called extractive metallurgy. But it all boils down to a super simple question. How in the world do you take a solid chunk of rock and turn it into pure, usable metal?
Well, the short answer is you heat it. And I mean, you heat it a lot. We're talking about these absolutely massive furnaces and kilns that just devour huge amounts of energy. And yeah, a lot of that comes from fossil fuels. It's a real brute force method, you know? It's worked for centuries, but it comes with a pretty hefty environmental price tag.
All right, so here's what we're going to cover today. First, we'll look at mining's big energy problem. Then, we'll get into a surprisingly hot idea. We'll dive into the science behind it, this thing called permittivity. Then, we'll see what happens when you put ores to the test. And finally, we'll wrap up with what this all means for smarter, not harder, mining. Okay, so let's jump right into Section 1, the challenge of extracting metal. And yeah, let's be clear about the scale of this problem. Getting valuable minerals out of the ground isn't just about digging. It's this incredibly complex game of chemistry and physics that is just unbelievably energy intensive.
And this right here, this quote, it's a really crucial point from the research we're diving into. The industry itself knows it has a problem. The pressure is coming from everywhere, economically, environmentally, you name it. They have to find a cleaner, more efficient way to get the materials we all depend on.
And that brings us to this surprisingly hot idea. I love this. What if, instead of just blasting the entire rock with heat in a giant furnace, indiscriminately, what if we could be a little more selective? What if we used microwaves?
I know, it sounds kind of weird, right? But the principle is exactly the same as in your kitchen. Your microwave is genius at heating up the water molecules in your food, but the plate itself stays pretty cool. So the big question scientists are asking is, could we do the same thing with rocks? Could we target just the valuable minerals and leave all the worthless waste rock cold? If we could pull that off, wow, the energy savings would be incredible.
Okay, to answer that question, we've got to get into the science just a little bit. There's this key property called permittivity. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like a material's secret microwave recipe. It basically tells you exactly how well something is going to heat up.
So here's the deal. Water has a really high permittivity, and that's why your soup gets piping hot. A ceramic plate, on the other hand, has a super low permittivity, which is why it stays cool to the touch. The key takeaway is that every material, and I mean every single mineral inside a chunk of ore, has its own unique permittivity value. And this, right here, is where things get really, really interesting. Okay, so it gets even cooler. Permittivity actually breaks down into two parts. First, you've got what's called real permittivity. Think of this as the storage part. It's all about how well a material can grab and hold on to energy from the microwave field, kind of like charging a tiny little battery. But then you have the imaginary permittivity. And folks, this is the business end. This is the part that tells you how well that stored energy actually turns into heat. This is what cooks your food, or in this case, cooks the ore. For what we're talking about, a higher imaginary permittivity means that mineral gets hotter faster. Simple as that.
All right, so armed with this knowledge, the researchers did exactly what you'd hope they do. They took a whole bunch of different, really important industrial ores, and they put them to the test. They wanted to figure out what each of their unique permittivity recipes looked like. And spoiler alert, what they found is that not all rocks are created equal. Not by a long shot.
And they didn't just test them at room temperature. Oh no, they built this amazing specialized rig to just blast these ore samples with microwaves while cranking the heat all the way up to 1400 degrees Celsius. And the whole time, they were tracking how the permittivity changed. Because, and this is so important, it turns out temperature changes everything.
Okay, let's look at case study number 1, bauxite. This is where we get aluminum. Now the black line here is its ability to store energy, but the red line, that's the one we really care about. That's its ability to actually create heat. And you can see it's pretty lazy at first, not much is happening. But then, right around 330 degrees Celsius, boom, the heating ability just spikes. So why? Well, that's the exact temperature where water that's chemically bound inside the minerals flashes into steam and gets released. and then just as quickly, its ability to heat up just plummets.
All right, now let's look at a totally different rock, an ultramafic nickel ore. Just look at this profile. It is all over the place. You see that initial dip as some water leaves, but then look at that, a huge peak way up around 950 degrees. That's when the minerals themselves start to chemically change. I mean, this ore has a completely different heating personality than the bauxite did.
And this slide right here just brilliantly illustrates the main point. On the left, you've got that nickel ore, a fantastic microwave absorber. It gets hot really effectively. On the right, a manganese ore. It barely even responds to the microwaves until you get it incredibly hot. Now imagine you try to use the exact same microwave process on both of these. You'd get wildly different results, right? One would work like a charm, and the other would just be a colossal waste of energy.
So why the huge difference? What's going on? Well, it all comes down to the specific ingredients in the rock. It's the exact mix of minerals, how much water is locked inside them, and what happens chemically when they get super hot, like when they start releasing gases like carbon dioxide. You see, every single ore has its own unique story to tell as it heats up.
Okay, so this brings us to the big payoff. Because all of this data, all these graphs, it's not just for, academic curiosity. This is pointing the way toward a future of smarter, not harder, mining.
And what's the goal? It's all about one thing, precision energy. The whole idea is to move away from that old-school brute force heating and get into something much more refined. Instead of treating every single ton of ore the exact same way, we can custom tailor the energy we use to the exact properties of the rock we're working with.
So here's the roadmap that this research gives us, a clear 4-step process. Step 1, you analyze the ore to see exactly what minerals are in there. Step 2, you determine its unique permittivity fingerprint, just like those graphs we were looking at. Step 3, you design a custom microwave process specifically for that fingerprint. And then step 4, the magic step. You apply energy with surgical precision. Maybe it's a quick, sharp blast of microwaves right at 330 degrees for the bauxite. Or maybe it's a longer, more powerful treatment at 950 degrees for that nickel ore. It's totally customized.
So let's just sum this all up. The key takeaways are simple. First, every ore has its own unique microwave heating profile. Second, temperature is a massive factor that changes everything. Third, knowing an ore's permittivity, its recipe, is the absolute key to unlocking incredible efficiency. And finally, all of this allows for a much smarter, more sustainable approach to getting the metals we need.
So, let's go back to our big question. Could the same tech that reheats your coffee really unlock a greener future for the materials all around us? Well, this research suggests the answer is a pretty resounding yes. It's all about working with the fundamental properties of nature instead of just fighting against them. And it just goes to show sometimes the most elegant solutions to our biggest challenges are hiding in plain sight, maybe even right there in your kitchen.